The stars looked different from Space Station Nova 7. Park Sunmai often stood at the large observation window during her breaks, watching the endless dance of starlight and spacecraft. Today, however, her attention was on something else entirely: the soft, irregular pulses of blue light coming from the corner of the children's playroom. The light came from a small boy named Jin. He sat alone, his silvery skin giving off gentle waves of color that didn't follow the usual patterns of his species. Most Nevulians his age could already control their natural bioluminescence perfectly, using it to speak in beautiful patterns of light and color. But Jin's lights flickered and pulsed in what others called random patterns, though Sunmai had begun to notice they weren't random at all. Still watching the new arrival, Kim Yuri appeared beside Sunmai, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Sunmai, who accepted it gratefully. "There's something special about him," Sunmai said, taking a sip of the hot drink. "The other care workers say he can't communicate properly, but I don't think that's true. I think he's speaking in a different way." Yuri raised her eyebrows. "Different how?" Before Sunmai could answer, a loud crash echoed through the playroom. One of the older children had knocked over a tower of building blocks, sending them scattering across the floor. While the other children jumped at the noise, Jin's lights burst into a complex pattern of purple and gold, not the typical startled response of bright white that most Nevulians would show. "Like that," Sunmai pointed. "See how his lights made that spiral pattern? That's the 3rd time I've seen him do that when there's a loud noise. He's responding consistently, just not in the way everyone expects." The Interstellar Orphan Care Center where they worked was home to children from dozens of species, all of whom had lost their parents to various space accidents, conflicts, or disasters. Jin had arrived 3 weeks ago after a mining accident near Alpha Centauri claimed the lives of his parents. The report said he had a genetic condition that affected his motor control and his ability to use the bioluminescent communication that was natural to his species. Sunmai walked over to where Jin sat, careful to approach from where he could see her. "Hello, Jin," she said softly. "Would you like to build something with me?" The boy's lights rippled with gentle blue waves. Uncertainty, perhaps, or shyness. He didn't move away when Sunmai sat down beside him, which she counted as progress. She picked up a few of the scattered blocks and started stacking them slowly. Jin watched, his lights pulsing in time with each block she placed. After a few moments, he reached out with slightly shaky hands and added a block of his own. "That's wonderful," Sunmai encouraged. "What should we build?" Jin's response came not in words or traditional light speech, but in a sudden burst of copper and azure that spread across his skin in geometric patterns. Sunmai had never seen anything like it. While other Nevulian children communicated in simple pulses and waves, Jin's lights moved in complex mathematical sequences. "Is that what you want to build?" she asked, pointing to the pattern still flickering across his skin. "We can try to make it with the blocks." For the first time since his arrival, Jin's lights showed the soft pink glow that Nevulians use to signal happiness. His hand still trembled as he reached for more blocks, but Sunmai noticed how his movements became more controlled when he focused on recreating the pattern he had shown. They worked together for almost an hour. Other children came and went, but Jin remained focused on their construction. When they finished, they had created a structure that looked like a crystalline spiral, similar to the pattern Jin had made with his lights. "It's beautiful," Sunmai said honestly. "You have an amazing mind for patterns." Jin's skin rippled with more pink light, brighter this time. He reached out and touched the structure gently, and his lights began to pulse in a rhythm that seemed almost like music. The moment was interrupted by Li Duhan, the administrative director, clearing his throat behind them. "Ms. Park, may I speak with you?" Sunmi turned to Jin. "I'll be right back. Would you like to show Yuri your creation while I talk to Mr. Li?" Jin's lights dimmed slightly, but he nodded, one of the few human gestures he had picked up. Yuri came over and sat down beside him, and Sun Mei followed Duhan into the hallway. "I've noticed you spending a lot of time with the Navulian boy," Duhan said, his expression concerned. "I need to remind you that we're a temporary care facility. Our job is to keep these children safe and healthy until we can find them permanent homes or their own species can take them." Sun Mi felt her jaw tighten. He Jin needs more than just basic care. He's intelligent and creative, but nobody's trying to understand how he communicates. The Navulian authorities have already suggested he be transferred to one of their specialized care facilities, Duhan said. "They have experience with cases like his." Cases like his. Sun Mi tried to keep her voice level. "He's not a case, he's a child. And those facilities." She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "I've read about them. They focus on trying to force children to communicate in standardized ways, even when it causes them distress." Duhan's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, but we have to consider what's best for him in the long term. Few families are equipped to handle a child with his challenges." Through the window, Sun Mi could see He Jin showing Yuri how he had built the spiral structure. His lights were moving in those complex patterns again, and Yuri was watching with genuine interest. "His challenges aren't the problem," Sun Mi said firmly. "The problem is that everyone's so focused on what they think he can't do that they're missing what he can do. Did you know he understands complex geometric patterns? That he can recreate them perfectly? That he responds to sound with light compositions that are completely unique?" Sun Mi. Duhan's use of her first name showed his shift from professional to personal concern. "I know you want to help him, but you need to maintain professional distance. We can't save every child that comes through here." "I'm not trying to save him," Sun Mi replied. "I'm trying to understand him." There's a difference. Back in the playroom, He Jin had begun creating a new pattern with his lights, this one seeming to respond to the gentle background music playing through the station speakers. Sun Mi watched as the colors flowed across his skin in perfect time with the melody. Duhan sighed. "Be careful. Don't make promises you can't keep, even unspoken ones." Sun Mi nodded, but her mind was already racing with ideas. She had noticed how He Jin responded to music, how his supposedly random light patterns often matched rhythms and melodies that humans might recognize, but that Navulians, with their different cultural background, might miss entirely. When she returned to the playroom, He Jin was still showing Yuri his light patterns. Yuri looked up at Sun Mi with excitement in her eyes. "Sun Mi, you need to see this," Yuri said. "I started humming a simple tune, and look what he does." He Jin's lights were creating waves of color that perfectly matched the rhythm of Yuri's melody. More than that, he was adding harmonies and light, creating counter-melodies that complemented the original tune. "He's not disabled," Sun Mi said softly. "He's bilingual in a way nobody has recognized before. He speaks in music." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Sun Mi and Yuri took turns playing different songs and watching He Jin's responses. They discovered he could reproduce any melody perfectly in light patterns, and even more impressively, he could create variations and harmonies that made the simple tunes more complex and beautiful. As the station's day cycle began to wind down and the lights dimmed to evening levels, Sun Mi helped He Jin clean up the blocks they had been using. His movements were still shaky, but she noticed he had better control when there was music playing. "Time for dinner," she said gently. "Would you like to sit with me today?" He Jin's lights pulsed in what she now recognized as his version of agreement. As they walked to the dining area, Sun Mi made a decision. She would find a way to help others understand He Jin's unique way of communicating. The standard assessments said he couldn't speak properly, but they were only looking for one kind of speech. What if his genetic condition hadn't taken away his ability to communicate, but had instead given him a whole new way of doing it? That evening, after her shift ended, Sun Mi stayed late to write a detailed report about her observations. She included videos of He Jin's responses to music and his ability to create complex patterns. She noted how his motor control improved when he was working with rhythm, and how his light patterns, far from being random, followed mathematical and musical principles. As she finished the report, she looked out the observation window again. The stars seemed brighter somehow, like they were dancing to their own celestial music. She thought about He-jin, about how he saw the world in patterns of light and sound that others had dismissed as chaos, simply because they didn't understand them. Tomorrow, she would begin developing new ways to help He-jin communicate with others. She would show them that different didn't mean less, that sometimes the most beautiful music came from instruments that didn't play quite the way everyone expected them to. The space station continued its eternal orbit, and somewhere in the children's dormitory, a young boy dreamed in waves of light, waiting for someone to finally understand his song. The morning light from the nearby star filled Space Station Nova 7's observation room with a warm golden glow. Park Sun-mai sat at her desk, surrounded by data tablets and old research papers about Nevulian communication. She had been working for 2 weeks on a new way to help He-jin speak to others. "You look tired," Yuri said, placing a fresh cup of coffee on Sun-mi's desk. "Did you stay up all night again?" Sun-mi nodded, picking up the coffee. "I think I'm close to something. Look at this." She pulled up a holographic display showing patterns of light waves. "These are recordings of He-jin's light signals from yesterday. And this," she pulled up another display, "is the sound wave pattern of the music that was playing at the time." Yuri leaned closer, her eyes widening. "They match perfectly." "Not just that," Sun-mai said excitedly. "He's adding layers to it. See these extra patterns here? They're like harmony parts in music. He's not just copying the sound, he's improving it." The door chimed, and He-jin entered the room with one of his care workers. His lights were dim, showing what Sun-mai had learned was his morning sleepiness. But when he saw Sun-mai, little sparkles of pink happiness appeared across his skin. "Good morning, He-jin," Sun-mai said warmly. "Would you like to try something new today?" He-jin moved closer, his lights showing curious patterns of green and gold. Sun-mai picked up a small device she had been working on. It looked like a simple tablet, but its screen was special. It could detect and display light patterns in real time. "See this?" She turned on some quiet music and held the tablet up. "Can you make your lights match the music like you usually do?" He-jin's lights began to pulse with the rhythm, creating beautiful patterns that flowed across his skin. On the tablet's screen, these patterns appeared as moving lines and shapes. Sun-mi touched one of the lines, and suddenly the room filled with a soft musical note. He-jin froze, his lights flickering with surprise. Then, slowly, a huge smile spread across his face. It was the first time Sun-mai had seen him smile. "The tablet turns your light patterns into sound," Sun-mai explained. "Want to try it again?" For the next hour, He-jin experimented with the tablet. He quickly learned that different colors and patterns made different sounds. Soon he was creating simple melodies, his hands still shaky, but his lights steady and sure. Yuri watched in amazement. "This is incredible. He's actually speaking through music." "More than that," Sun-mai said. "Watch his hands." As He-jin played with the tablet, his movements became smoother. When he was focused on creating music with his lights, the tremors in his hands decreased noticeably. The rhythm helps him, Yuri realized. It's like his whole body responds better when there's a musical pattern to follow. Sun-mi nodded. "I think that's why he has trouble with traditional Nevulian light speech. Their patterns are based on language structure, but He-jin's brain works in musical patterns instead." Later that day, Sun-mi took He-jin to the station's music room. It was usually used for cultural education, but today she had a different plan. She started playing a simple earth song on the piano, one with a clear, steady rhythm. He-jin's lights immediately began to dance with the music. But this time, thanks to the tablet, his light patterns turned into accompanying notes that perfectly complemented the piano melody. "He's sight-reading the music," came a voice from the doorway. Lee Do-han stood there, watching with surprise. And adding harmonies. Sun-Mi nodded. Not just that. Look at how steady his hands are when he's playing. The music isn't just letting him communicate, it's helping his motor control too. Du-Han walked into the room, his expression thoughtful. The Nevulian Council called again yesterday. They're still pushing for him to be transferred to their special care facility. Show them. He-Jin's light patterns suddenly spelled out on the tablet's screen, accompanied by a gentle melody. Everyone in the room froze. He-Jin, Sun-Mi asked softly, did you just? The boy's lights pulsed with determination. Slowly, carefully, he created more patterns that the tablet translated. I want to stay. I want to learn more music. Du-Han sat down heavily in a nearby chair. That's the first time he's communicated in words. No, Sun-Mi corrected gently. It's just the first time we've been able to understand him. He's been communicating all along. We just needed to learn his language. Over the next few hours, He-Jin began to open up more. Through combinations of light, music, and the tablet's translations, he told them about how frustrated he had been when no one understood him. He explained that regular Nevulian light speech felt like trying to sing a song in the wrong key. He could see how it was supposed to work, but he couldn't make his lights follow those patterns. But music makes sense, his lights spelled out. Music feels right. Sun-Mi worked with him each day after that, developing new ways to use the tablet. She brought in different earth instruments, and He-Jin learned to create light patterns that could play each one. Yuri helped design exercises that combine music and movement, helping him gain better control of his motor skills. Other children at the care center began to notice. Some would come to watch He-Jin play, fascinated by the way his lights could create music. A few even started trying to learn his way of making music, leading to impromptu concerts where human and alien children would play together, creating songs that had never been heard before. One evening, as Sun-Mi was helping He-Jin practice a new song, she noticed something remarkable. He was using his lights to create multiple instrumental parts at once, like a one-person orchestra. The tablet displayed the pattern, complex layers of rhythm and melody that professional musicians would find challenging. He-Jin, she said carefully, how do you see music in your mind? His lights shifted to create a beautiful pattern that the tablet translated. Like stars dancing. Every sound has a color and a shape. When they come together, they make pictures in light. Sun-Mi thought about this. Can you show me what you mean? He-Jin's lights began to pulse and flow in a complex pattern. The tablet translated it into a familiar earth melody, Mozart's Ein kleine Nacht music, but with additional layers that made it sound like an entire orchestra was playing. At the same time, his lights created shapes and patterns that moved with the music, turning the simple tune into a spectacular light show. It's not just music, Yuri whispered, watching in awe. It's not just light either. It's something entirely new. Sun-Mi realized she was right. He-Jin hadn't just found a way to communicate. He had created an entirely new art form, one that combined music, light, and movement in ways nobody had ever imagined before. The next day, Sun-Mi began documenting everything. She recorded He-Jin's performances, wrote detailed notes about his progress, and worked with Yuri to create a formal report about his unique abilities. They included data showing how his motor control had improved, how his confidence had grown, and how his new form of communication had begun influencing other children at the care center. We need to show this to the Nevulian Council, Yuri said as they finished the report. They need to see that their traditional methods aren't the only way. Sun-Mi agreed, but she felt nervous. She had grown very attached to He-Jin over the past weeks. The thought of him being taken away to a facility that might not understand or appreciate his unique way of communicating made her heart ache. As if sensing her worry, He-Jin came over and created a gentle pattern of light that the tablet translated into a simple message. Thank you for hearing my music. Sun-Mi smiled, blinking back tears. Thank you for sharing it with us. That evening, As the station's day cycle dimmed to night, Sunmai watched He-jin playing with some other children. They were all trying to copy his light patterns, creating a beautiful display of color and sound. She realized that what had started as a way to help one child communicate had turned into something much bigger. He-jin wasn't just learning to speak. He was teaching others a new way to listen. His supposed disability had opened up possibilities that nobody had imagined before. As she watched him conduct his light symphony, Sunmi knew that whatever happened next, He-jin had already changed the way people thought about communication, music, and what it meant to speak from the heart. The meeting room on Space Station Nova 7 felt cold and empty. Park Sun-mei sat at the large table, surrounded by screens showing the faces of the Nevulian Council members. Their silvery skin glowed with formal patterns of blue and white, showing their authority. "Miss Park," said the head counselor, his lights pulsing in the traditional formal greeting. "We have reviewed your report about the child He-jin. While your work is interesting, we believe he would be better served in our specialized facility." Sun-mi took a deep breath. Behind her, Yuri sat with He-jin, who was watching the screens with nervous flickers of yellow light across his skin. "Council members," Sun-mi began, "before you make your decision, I would like to show you something." She pressed a button on the table, and the room filled with soft music. "He-jin, would you like to show them what you can do?" He-jin stepped forward, his lights still showing nervousness. But as the music played, his natural talent took over. His lights began to dance and flow, creating patterns that the tablet translated into beautiful harmonies. He wasn't just playing along with the music. He was adding new layers, turning the simple melody into a complex symphony of light and sound. One of the council members leaned forward, her lights showing surprise. "This is unexpected, but it's not traditional Nevulian communication." "No," Sun-mi agreed. "It's something new, something special." She pulled up the data she and Yuri had collected. "Look at these charts. When He-jin first arrived, his motor control was very limited. Now, when he's working with music, his movements are almost completely steady." Lee Du-han, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "The other children at the center have also benefited from He-jin's presence. Many have learned to appreciate different forms of communication. Some have even started learning his musical light language." The council members' lights flickered as they discussed among themselves. Sun-mi could see confusion and uncertainty in their patterns. They had never seen anything like this before. "Miss Park," the head counselor said finally, "while this is impressive, our facilities have years of experience working with children who have communication difficulties. We have proven methods. Your methods are based on forcing children to communicate like everyone else." Sun-mi interrupted, her voice firm but respectful. "He-jin doesn't need to be fixed. He needs to be understood." Yuri stepped forward with more data. "We've documented how traditional Nevulian light speech patterns actually increase He-jin's stress levels and make his motor control worse. But when he's allowed to communicate through music, both his physical and emotional health improve." The council members watched as Yuri showed them brain scan comparisons. The images clearly showed how He-jin's brain lit up with healthy activity when using his musical light language, compared to the stress patterns that appeared when he tried to use traditional Nevulian communication. Furthermore, Sun-mi continued, "He-jin has made incredible progress in learning to translate his thoughts into words using the musical interface we developed. He can now communicate complex ideas clearly. He just does it differently." As if to prove her point, He-jin stepped forward again. His lights began to move in careful patterns that the tablet translated into words. "Please let me stay. I am learning here. I am happy here. I can teach others new ways to speak with light and music." The council members' lights flickered rapidly, a sign of surprise in Nevulian culture. They had not expected such clear communication from a child they had labeled as disabled. But then a new problem arose. A human official from the Interstellar Adoption Agency appeared on one of the screens. "This is all very touching," she said, "but there's another issue. Miss Park, you file an application to adopt Hejin yourself. This raises serious concerns about professional boundaries. Sun Mei felt her heart beat faster, but she stood her ground. Yes, I have. Because I understand him. Because I see his potential. Because every child deserves a family who accepts them exactly as they are. The complications of cross-species adoption. The official began, but Sun Mei cut her off gently. Are no greater than the complications any parent faces in understanding their child, she said. I've spent months learning Hejin's language. I've helped him develop ways to express himself. I've watched him grow from a withdrawn, frustrated child into a confident, creative individual who's teaching others new ways to communicate. Hejin moved closer to Sun Mei, his lights creating a pattern that the tablet translated as, "She is already my mother in my heart. She heard my music when no one else could." The room fell silent. Even the council members' lights stilled. Sun Mei felt tears in her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was too important for tears. Yuri stepped forward again. I've prepared a detailed analysis of Hejin's progress over the past months. It shows not only his improved communication skills, but also significant advances in his motor control, emotional well-being, and social interactions. Moving him now would undo all of this progress. The head counselor's lights showed thoughtful patterns. You believe you can provide better care than our specialized facilities. I believe Hejin is already receiving the best possible care, Sun Mei replied. He's in an environment where he's accepted, understood, and allowed to develop his unique abilities. The other children here are learning from him, and he's learning from them. This isn't just about caring for one child. It's about creating a community that celebrates differences instead of trying to eliminate them. Duhan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up again. I've worked in interstellar childcare for 20 years. What Sun Mei and Hejin have achieved together is unprecedented. They're not just overcoming communication barriers. They're creating new bridges between species. The council members began discussing among themselves, their lights moving in formal patterns. The human official looked skeptical but thoughtful. Sun Mei waited, her hand resting gently on Hejin's shoulder as his lights pulsed with nervous energy. Finally, the head counselor spoke. We need time to consider all aspects of this situation. This is not a simple matter of placement or adoption. It could set precedents for future cases. While you consider, Sun Mei said, please remember that this isn't about precedents or procedures. It's about a child who has found his voice and his home. It's about recognizing that different doesn't mean less. Hejin's lights suddenly burst into a complex pattern that filled the room with beautiful music. The tablet translated his message. I want to show you one more thing. He began creating a light symphony that told his story. The darkness of not being understood, the confusion of trying to speak in ways that felt wrong, and finally, the joy of finding someone who heard his true voice. As the music filled the room, Sun Mei saw something she had never seen before. Tears in the eyes of the Nevulian council members. Their lights began to pulse in harmony with Hejin's music, creating a bridge between the old ways and the new. The human official wiped her eyes and said softly, sometimes the rules need to bend to accommodate something extraordinary. As they left the meeting room that evening, nothing was officially decided yet. But Sun Mei felt hope growing in her heart. Hejin's lights were showing the soft pink of happiness as he walked beside her, occasionally breaking into little musical patterns that made the other children smile. Whatever they decide, Sun Mei told him, we'll face it together. Your music has already changed more hearts than you know. Hejin's response came in a beautiful pattern of light that the tablet translated simply. You helped me find my song. Now I can help others find theirs too. Looking at him, Sun Mei realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting against the old ways, but from creating new paths that nobody had imagined before. Hejin hadn't just found his voice. He had created a whole new way of speaking that could bring people together across the stars. 2 weeks had passed since the meeting with the Nevulian Council. Park Sun-mai stood in the Great Hall of Space Station Nova 7, where a special hearing would decide He-jin's future. The room was filled with people from different species, human officials, Nevulian council members, and even some reporters who had heard about the unique case. He-jin sat beside Sun-mai, his lights showing gentle waves of nervous blue and hopeful pink. He wore the special formal robe that Yuri had helped make for him, with tiny sensors woven into the fabric that could amplify his light patterns and translate them into music. "Are you ready?" Sun-mai asked softly. He-jin's lights formed the pattern for yes, adding a small musical trill that made Sun-mai smile. Over the past months, he had created his own vocabulary of light music, combining traditional Nevulian light patterns with musical expressions that anyone could understand. The head of the adoption board, a kind-faced woman named Director Kang, called the hearing to order. "We are here today to consider two unprecedented requests," she announced. First, the cross-species adoption of a Nevulian child by a human parent. Second, the recognition of a new form of communication as valid for official purposes. The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Cross-species adoption was rare but not unheard of. However, no one had ever asked for a new form of communication to be officially recognized before. "Before we begin," Director Kang continued, "the child He-jin has requested to make a presentation. We have agreed to this unusual request because it relates directly to the matter at hand." Sun-mai squeezed He-jin's hand gently as he stood up. They had practiced this many times, but never in front of so many people. He-jin walked to the center of the room, his movements slightly shaky, but his lights steady and sure. The lights in the great hall dimmed. He-jin began his performance with a simple melody, his lights creating soft patterns that the sensors in his robe translated into gentle music. The patterns grew more complex as he added layer after layer of light and sound. He showed them his story. Through light and music, he shared his memories of his parents, their love shone in warm golden swirls. He showed the darkness and confusion after losing them, his lights turning deep blue and purple. Then came his arrival at the care center, shown in uncertain flickers that gradually transformed into stronger, more confident patterns. When he reached the part about meeting Sun-mai, his lights created a new melody, one that made several people in the audience wipe their eyes. It was a song about being understood, about finding family in unexpected places. The music spoke of love that didn't need words to be real. But He-jin wasn't finished. His lights began to show something new, his experiences teaching other children at the care center. The patterns showed how his different way of speaking had helped others learn to express themselves better. Some human children had learned to understand light patterns, while some Nevulian children had discovered the joy of music. Together, they had created something entirely new. As he finished, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then Director Kang spoke, her voice soft with emotion. "In all my years overseeing adoptions, I have never seen a child express themselves so clearly without using a single traditional word." The head of the Nevulian Council stood up, his lights showing formal patterns tinged with something that looked like awe. "We came here believing we needed to protect a child who couldn't communicate properly," he said. "Instead, we have witnessed the birth of a new form of communication that could help bridge the gap between our peoples." Yuri stepped forward with more evidence. She showed brain scans of other children who had learned He-jin's light music language. "Look at these patterns," she said. "When children communicate this way, both human and Nevulian brains show increased activity in areas associated with empathy and understanding. They're not just learning new words, they're learning new ways to connect with each other." Lee Do-han spoke next, describing how He-jin's presence had changed the entire care center. "Children who never played together before now create music together," he said. "They're learning that being different isn't a barrier. It's an opportunity to create something new." Director Kang turned to Sun-mai. "Miss Park, you have requested to adopt He-jin. Can you tell us why?" Sun-mai stood up, feeling He-jin's warm presence beside her. When I first met Hejin, everyone said he couldn't communicate properly. But that wasn't true. We just weren't listening properly. He taught me that sometimes love means learning a whole new language. Not just words, but heart songs that cross the boundaries between species. She took a deep breath and continued. I want to be Hejin's mother not because he needs saving, but because together we can help others learn what we've discovered. That family isn't about being the same. It's about creating harmony from our differences. The Nevulian Council members' lights showed patterns of deep thought. Finally, the head counselor spoke. We came here prepared to insist that Hejin be placed in our specialized facilities, but what we've seen today suggests that perhaps our traditional methods need to expand. This child has created something remarkable, a way of speaking that brings people together instead of setting them apart. Director Kang nodded. I believe we have seen enough to make our decision. She looked around the room. Does anyone object to these requests? The room stayed quiet. Even the officials who had been skeptical were showing signs of being moved by what they had witnessed. Then, by the power vested in me by the Interstellar Adoption Board, I approve both requests, Director Kang announced. Hejin's form of communication will be officially recognized as valid for all legal and educational purposes, and his adoption by Park Sunmai is approved. Hejin's lights exploded into the most beautiful patterns Sunmai had ever seen, filling the room with music that could only be described as pure joy. She knelt down and hugged him close, feeling his lights dance against her skin in the pattern that had become his special way of saying, I love you. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. The care center helped Sunmai convert part of her quarters into a space for Hejin, complete with special lighting that could respond to his music. Yuri and the other staff organized a farewell party where the children performed a light music concert they had created together. One evening, after moving the last of Hejin's things into his new room, Sunmai took him to the observation deck. They stood together looking out at the stars, which seemed to dance in the darkness. Hejin's lights formed a question. Can we make new star pictures? Sunmai smiled, remembering how humans had created constellations by connecting stars into pictures. Of course we can. What pictures do you see? Together, they began making up their own constellations. Hejin used his lights to trace new patterns between the stars, creating stories in light and music. Some of the patterns looked like traditional Nevulian symbols, others like earth animals, and some were entirely new shapes that combined both cultures. As they played their star-naming game, other families from the station began to join them. Soon the observation deck was filled with children and parents from different species, all sharing stories about the patterns they saw in the stars. Hejin's lights spelled out one final message before they headed home. The stars sing too. They just needed someone to hear their music. Sunmai looked at her son, her wonderful, unique, musical son, and knew that sometimes the greatest gifts came in unexpected packages. Hejin hadn't just found a new family. He had helped create a whole new way for families across the stars to understand each other. As they walked home together, their shadows mixed with Hejin's gentle light patterns on the station walls. Sunmai thought about how love, like music, didn't need words to change the world. Sometimes it just needed someone brave enough to sing a different song, and someone else brave enough to learn how to listen.